Someone please tell me what is a class? Anyone who knows what's a class? What is a class? Have you heard of it? Programming language class.
Yes, it
What is a class?
has is a user-defined data type.
User defined data type. Okay. What does that mean? Try to explain a class to me in simple language, simplest language possible. Don't explain it to me in some terminology which is given in some book, because you also do not understand that, I also do not understand. So let's try to understand class in the very simple form. Anyone else who wants to give it a try? What's a class? Some of you said that
We
you guys have
can
done
take the
programming,
example. We can take the example of cars. Cars is a class.
huh? Okay.
Yeah, inside cars, we have different types of cars. Those are nothing but variables, and each car has specific functionalities. Specific functionality, that is nothing but the method.
Right.
Please correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you are correct, but I think that is also available in some of the programming books and all that. So can we make it even a little more
Yeah, you
simple?
answered. Okay. Take a classroom. If I belong to 10th class,
Hmm.
that is a class, and the students are like the members of the class,
Mm-hmm.
and what is taught is nothing but the method of the class.
Okay.
I don't
Uh,
know.
yeah.
Cannot give more simple example.
Okay. Anyone else? Yeah. Both the examples are pretty simple actually. Uh, Anyone else who wants to add on to this?
Uh, in terms of object, we can say that class is a container which hold objects.
Class is a container which holds object. Okay. Fine. So let me try to break it a little more simple. But before that, let me ask you one question. What is a method? Method or function?
Something that performs a specific task.
Right. Something that performs a specific task. Okay, good. So all these variables which we are defining, we yesterday we saw different data types and variables and all that stuff, right? So I'll not go by any of the programming language definitions and all. I'll just put try and put the simplest things in front of you, and I'm pretty sure you guys will understand what I'm talking about. So we have talked about data types and variables. Now, with the data types and variable defining itself, my job will not happen, right? If I say there is a variable a which has this value, that does not perform any action for me. Does that? No. Right? So variables are just some values or value containers. Now, till the time I do not define a method, my variable is meaningless. Make sense? So for your variables to perform, or for your variables to do something, you need to define methods in the program. Okay? So method is where you actually write the instructions that this is what needs to be done. Okay, variables are just used for assigning values or comparing certain things or checking some values. That's what a variable can do. So what we learned in our last session about the variables and the data types, that was just defining the variables and the data types, and understanding what sort of data types can be defined. Now it's important for us to define the methods. Till the time you do not define a method, there is no action which happens. Variable does not have any capacity of performing any action. Only the method has. Clear? Okay. So in your program, you will need to have the methods as well. Okay. Let's say I have a variable a, which is an integer, which is 20, and I have uh, another variable integer b, which is 30. Okay, and I have another variable integer called result. Sorry. Now, out of these 1, 2, 3 variables, they are not capable of performing anything on their own, right? Now, I can have methods defined here. Let's say I have a method called add. Okay, now this add method, in add method I can go and say result equals a plus b, return result. Then I can have another method subtract, where I say result equals a minus b, return result. Something like this. Then I can have another method multiply result equals a into b, return result. Method divide result equals a divided by b. Right. So the actual action is happening on the method. So when you call add method, it will add the value and return the whatever result. Okay, if you use the call the subtract method, it will do the subtraction, right? So that way you define the methods in your code, and method is what is actually going to perform the action. Okay, so that's there. So your program should have variables and it should have methods. Quite simple, because variables are not capable of doing anything, so my program needs to have methods, right? So when you're writing a program, you need variables and you need methods. Okay. Now all these variables and methods which you are writing, now they need to be stored in a class. Because when I write the variables and I'm writing the methods, I need to store them somewhere, right? So these variables and methods will be usually stored inside a class. That's the simple explanation for you, for people who do not understand what a class is from whatever definitions we were talking about. Don't get into that. You need let's say if you have to write a story, or if you have to write a poem on computer, so what will you do? You will open a Microsoft Word document, write all those things and save it in the Word document, right? So same way, just consider your class to be similar kind of a thing. So in the class you will write your variables and methods and you will store the class. Now why are we writing all these things in the class? Why do we need to write the variables and methods in the class? Because it's important for us that wherever we want to reference that method, okay, we will refer to that method through that class. So first of all, you need to call the class, and then you will need to call the method. Fine. So let's say in this case, okay, in this case we can have a class called mathematics. Okay, and then we have these variables. Let's say I have these 3 variables defined inside the class, and then I have these methods defined under it. Okay, Now wherever you want to reference, you can reference it through mathematics. First of all, you'll have to call the class mathematics, and then you'll have to call whatever method you want, add or subtract or whatever. Fine. So now the same way, the way you have a class for mathematics, you can have one class for English maybe, and that will have methods specific to English. Fine. So this is basically, how you define your program. So this is how your program is written. So ideally, a class in the simplest possible language should have a class should have name, it should have variables defined, and it should have methods. Fine. So all the methods required for performing one particular operation or one particular kind of task should be put inside one class so that you can refer to that. Now what we are going to do, all the methods which I am going to call on a page, I am going to put them in one class and I am going to call that class as a controller. That's what we are going to do. So for all the methods that I'm going to use on the visualforce page, I'll define all those methods in one particular class, save it, and the same class I'm going to call it on the visualforce page as a custom controller. So a very simple example which you can easily relate to what we have done so far, right? So that's how a class works. Clear on it? Let me know if there is any difficulty. Okay.
Jeet,
Let me log in. Yeah.
Jeet, now in what circumstances do we use a standard controller and what circumstances do we use a custom controller? In the
Wherever you
sense,
are happy with, wherever you are happy with what Salesforce has defined, you use a standard controller. You don't need
okay,
any additional require functionalities. If you are not satisfied with that, then you use a custom controller. Okay, standard controller comes up with its own limitations, right? If you're not okay with that, then you will use a custom controller.
जीत कोई एग्जांपल दे सकते हो for
Take a very simple example. Now, standard controller. What happens? The simplest example will be when I'm using a standard controller. We have seen that if it's account controller, then only account data can be displayed. Correct?
right?
Now, if you want one page, on that page you want to display a list of accounts, campaigns, opportunities, everything. Let's say, I'm
अच्छा,
just giving an
okay,
example. So for in that situation, your standard controller doesn't work because standard controller
right,
always have to be connected to one object. So custom controller will help you there, right?
okay,
Now, on a standard controller, when you save an account record, let's say when an account record is saved, that's a default save operation and it does not do anything else. It just saves that record. Now if you have a requirement that the moment I save an account record, automatically one opportunity should also get saved, let's say.
okay, okay,
So that's something which custom controller has to do because standard controller only will save the account record. So that sort of thing.
अच्छा, okay,
Fine. So anywhere, you will the moment you start writing the custom controllers and see those examples, you will start figuring it out. So automatically the
got it.
moment requirement comes from the client. So we don't actually go by this way that we'll have to use custom controller or standard controller.
अच्छा,
It
okay,
it works like when the requirement comes to us, and always every time with Salesforce will have to be requirement specific. So
okay,
we don't decide that acha chalo today though we'll have to use a custom controller, so let's pick up something and design a custom controller. That's how we do not work, right? Customer gives us a requirement and our job should be always to try and do or provide a solution without programming. So that should be your first attempt.
okay, okay,
No matter how good a programmer you are, no matter how much salary you are taking from the company, Your first job should be try and provide a solution without writing a single line of code. Fine.
Okay.
Because ultimate goal for any developer should be to keep things as much simple as possible. Because I can write a program, so does not mean that I start writing program for a validation rule also. The things which can be done through validation rule, I have seen, why I'm talking about this, because I've seen a lot of people do this, and then their system gets a lot more complex and a little more complicated and all that stuff. So, you know, first thing should be to resolve this or get the solution using declarative methods or declarative whatever we have. No programming, no coding. Second, if you feel that no, it is anyhow not possible with the declarative options, then move into using the uh, programming side. Again, in programming, if you are working on the visual force side, your attempt should be to try and use standard controller as much as possible, because again that saves you from a lot of code. Okay, and that saves a lot of time for your company
Got you.
also, not just at the time of developing the app or whatever interface here that you're doing, at the time of corrections for someone else to come and understand. So for everything, that's good. If you feel that no, this is not manageable using standard controller, then move into the custom controller. So this is how things should flow for you, right?
Okay. Got you.
All right. So let's do a simple example now. Since we have talked about this part that a class should have a name, variable, and a method, and I've also told you that we can create a class and then we can call that class on my Visual Force page. So let's do a small example so that we understand. Okay. So to create a class in Salesforce, all that you have to do is you have to go to Setup, Develop, Apex Classes. Okay. For you, Apex class, for people who know what is a class, who have done programming earlier, it's good. For people who do not understand, for you, Apex class is just one place where you will write your program. And your program will have your variables and methods, everything defined. So in that program, everything related to that particular program will be written. Right. So this is your Apex class. Start writing it here. Okay. When you define a class or a method, you have to define the class or method as public or private. Okay. Anything which needs to be called outside this class needs to be public. Okay. And if you make something as private, that will be recognized only within the boundary of this class. Okay. So while you're writing a class, the outermost class for you at this point of time, it's only the outermost class. So it always will be public. Okay. So don't worry about it. Just straight away go ahead and write, because I'll have to call it somewhere, right? So this always has to be public. It is to be called on a visual force page, right? So it has to be public. Then only it can be called on a visual force page. So public class name. Give it whatever class name you want to give, and sorry, and then, as I said, define your variables and methods. Now, variables which are required for your method. So let's say I want to display a text on my page, on my Visual Force page, called "How are you?" Okay. Let's say that's the text that I want to display on the Visual Force page. So "How are you" is a string. To define a variable, string is equals whatever. How are u. Okay, and as I said, variables cannot do anything, cannot perform any you know, they cannot perform any action, they cannot be called anywhere. So just defining the variable will not be enough for you. So you cannot say that I have defined variable and I'll call this variable on the Visual Force page. No, you cannot call the variable. So to call, you'll have to define a method. Okay, so just to return the value of this, you have to define a get method.
Sorry, could you repeat? Could you repeat what you just said, please?
See,
Could you repeat it?
what am I trying to do? I'm trying to display the value of this variable on my Visual Force page, right? That's what my job is. I cannot call this variable directly on the Visual Force page. Fine, as I told you earlier, that variables cannot do anything. They just have values, they are just value holders. So you cannot call a variable on the Visual Force page. What you have to do is, you have to call a method on the Visual Force page. Correct? So for that we have to define a method. Now method also needs to be public. Why? Because it needs to be called outside, right? From Visual Force page I'm going to call this method, so this also has to be public. Then you have to define the return type of the method. Then you have to say get s return s. Okay, so this is a getter method. Okay, there are different types of methods which we are going to talk about. This simple one is a getter method. Getter method is used for calling the value. uh, Getter method is basically used for returning some value on the Visual Force page. Okay, on the front end user interface, which is going to be the Visual Force page in our case, right? So that's the job of a getter method is. Okay, now whatever you are trying to return, that return type you have to mention here. Okay, so now this method should return the value of s on your Visual Force page. Okay, just give me one quick minute to connect it to the charger.
This time it's yours. Jeet, I was saying this
Okay,
time it's your
yeah,
charger.
hi, it's my charger. Okay, so this method, this getS method, if I call it on the Visual Force page, what this method will do, it will return the value of s on the Visual Force page. So what is the value of s? How are you? Got it? So that's my method. Now my program is ready, my class is ready, it has a variable and method defined. Now when I call this on the Visual Force page, I'll have to call this class as a controller on the Visual Force page, and once I've used the class as the controller on the page, I'll be able to access all the methods from that particular class. So right now I just have one. So let's go and define the code here. Now, anyone remembers the last page number that we did? So here your controller will be what? Controller equals to
C1.
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 Yes. So the class name will come here as controller. Now, since you have used the class as a controller here, now all the methods from that class can be used. So how do you use call a method here? You just have to use it like this within exclamation marks. Sorry, within the curly brackets, starting with an exclamation mark and name of the method. Okay. So when you define a get method, a getter method, you have to always start it with a get keyword. A getter method should always have a get keyword. That's important. Now, when you call this method on the visual force page, you don't need to put the get keyword there. Okay, that just indicates that it's a getter method. That's it. Okay, you don't need to call the entire get s here. You can just call s here. See, got it? So how the data is being called, or how the values are being called from the class to the visual force page. That's the simple connect. Now let me define one more method here. One more variable. Let's say count
Jeet,
a. Mhm.
Jeet, now you open two screens, is it? One screen you are writing this code, then
Right. I have two tabs.
okay,
One tab is the code. On the other tab, I have the visual force page.
okay, okay,
Right.
okay. Yeah.
You don't have to open two tabs always, but because I'm trying to show you the examples and all, usually what you will do, I mean, while you are working, you will complete the class first and then you will go to the page, right? But because I'm toggling between the code and the page, that's the reason I opened two things. Okay?
Okay.
Just one question.
Mm-hmm.
The S that we are using in the visual force page, is it the name of the method or is it the name of the variable?
Okay, very good question. You guys tell me, is it the name of the method or the variable? You got his question, right? Using the S that we are using there, is it coming from the name of method or coming from the name of variable? So what should be the answer to that? Anyone?
I think
Yeah,
it's a
S is
variable.
variable. Yes, it is variable.
It's variable,
Yeah.
and you were all listening to me all this while.
No, I think it is method. You just said that we can exclude get and just include S.
Right. And
But
I
I just wanted to
also,
confirm that.
yeah, and I also said that you cannot call a variable on the page. And
Yes.
this variable is not even public. Fine. So if I can directly call S from the variable, what is the point of defining the method? So the reason that we have defined method is because we need to call the method. It's coming from the method name, not from the variable name. Okay. Instead of S, this could have been anything. Okay, I usually write it as same as the variable so that to avoid confusions, but it can be anything. Ultimately what it is going to return is this is the variable, this is what, but that's in the code. While I'm calling, I'm going to call the name of the method excluding the get part. Fine.
Or does it mean this that if I write get S1, it will fetch S variable S?
That's method name. Your method name can be
Oh,
anything. Whatever is your method name, you just have to make sure that you are calling that on the visual force page. Got it?
Jeet,
So
can
Jeet,
we
now,
repeat that
yeah,
change? It will, yeah, the both questions.
No.
Jeet, can we put that S as S1 and we want to see actually,
So you
will
don't
it
trust me. अच्छा, ठीक है. Line 7, public string dot SObject. This one. Fine. So ultimately it doesn't matter what name you have given here. Method name can be anything. Again, what is it returning? It's returning s. S is the variable and the value of s is how are you. So that's what this method is doing, right? So you'll call the method. We define it as one and we define method here as one. Ultimately it's going to return me the value. So just try to get the connect how it is happening. And I usually in most of my programs I define this same as the variable name just to avoid confusion. I mean, it's difficult to keep one variable name in mind and again then you are defining one more method name, then you are referencing to that. So for convenience we use the same name, but you can have a different name as you see here in this case. Correct? So it's the method name which is being called. Get this connect very clear. Fine. Variable cannot be called. Variable is completely out of touch. For a visual force page cannot access this variable. Doesn't have access to this because firstly it's not public. Secondly, visual force page cannot call variable. It can only call method. Fine.
Just one more question.
Mm-hmm.
Is it mandatory that all the getter methods have to start with get, or is it a good
Yes.
practice to start it with get?
No, no, not good practice. This is mandatory.
Okay.
Okay, so if you don't start it with get and you try to call it on the visual force page, it will search for that method. It will say I'm not finding a get method. Okay? And that's the reason why you don't have to use the get keyword here, because that's a mandatory keyword defined keyword. Okay, so you always have to start a getter method with get keyword. Fine.
Ajit, in visual force page, is it like we are calling that method S1 and we are actually before editing that S to S1, I was thinking that we are just printing S there.
No, you are calling the method. अभी एग्जाम्पल भी तो दिखा तो दिया आपको.
Yes, 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 yes. Now got.
हाँ, तो अब यहाँ पे देखो. Now the S1 is not a variable, no? Now we are getting,
Yes,
so that's what I'm trying to say, that now you get the connect, right? What is being called.
yes, 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 yes.
Fine. So
Okay.
again, let me, reiterate the same statement that you cannot call a variable on a visual force page. Variable does not have, we do not have any option of calling a variable outside the class. Fine. Only methods can be called. That's the reason why, before the method I have written public. Variable के आगे तो नहीं लिखा public. So that is the thing. So variables cannot be called on a visual force page or anywhere. Variables are to be used within the class itself. Variables boundary is within the class. But this is just for your understanding again, I want your fundamentals to be okay, to be good. So for your understanding, every time what we are calling is a method. We are not calling any variable. I see a lot of people, having that small understanding difficulty here that the variable is getting called on a method. It's always method which will be called. Clear? And then inside the method, it is written that
Jeet,
return the
okay.
s. So that's it.
Jeet,
Yep.
we declared a variable s. Now, how does the system know what is s1? I mean, s1 को हमने define नहीं किया, right? We're just using it. But how is it storing that s value in s1?
S1 you have not defined. ये क्या है फिर?
Acha. And then how is the s value getting stored there?
It's not getting stored, it's getting returned because you have written inside this.
Okay. Okay.
Fine.
Mm.
I mean, in the code, whatever we instruct, if in the code we say that, okay, when I call Asha, Shefali should say yes, the code will do that. So that's what it is doing, right? And method name is S1. And in that I have said return S. So it goes and, returns the value of S. S is a variable. S का value क्या है ये?
Got you.
So
Okay.
returns this. And that's what is written inside the code. That's what is written inside that method. Fine.
Acha. Okay.
So let's do one more example. I think things will get a little more clear with that. Now let's define an S object. Let's see how do we actually get the value of S object there. So we talked about this account A equals new account ABCD limited. Okay, so now I've defined an S object. Let me define a method. Again, I cannot call this A directly on the visual force page. So I will define one more getter method here. This time the return type will be account. It's going to return account, get A, return. So when I'm calling an SObject method, so this SObject method will have the variables also stored inside that, right? So you can call the variable as well, a dot name, a dot industry. That is what was defined there. Name of the account was ABCD Limited. Industry was defined as technology. That's what was defined, and that's what we are calling here. All right. See this? Let me know if there is any difficulty understanding this. Pretty simple. So how we are actually, I'm just trying to explain to you how we are calling the values on the visual force page, right? So whatever variable you define now, variable you can define whatever you want, and then you can call it on the visual force page. Let's do one more example. If this is okay, let's go ahead and do one more example. Or if you have any questions here, please ask. Since we are okay with it, so let's create one more class.
Actually, one
Mm-hmm.
second.
Yep,
Like
please.
as Shiva has named, what other methods do we have other than get?
We have a few other methods, but we'll get into the methods one by one. Okay. So I
Okay,
will not
okay.
list them down.
So,
We'll go by one by one.
so respective to methods, we only have standard methods. Like if it is set of 10 methods, means only 10 methods can be called over here. Nothing out of the box can be done over here.
If it's a custom controller, then you just have to define the method and you have to call it. Okay. If it's a standard controller, then you can call the methods which are predefined. But
Okay.
if you're
No, that's
using,
what I'm asking for. Like if it is an that's what if we have totally 10 methods in Salesforce, only the 10 methods can be called over. Nothing out of the box can be tried out. Right?
no, sorry, I think I did not get it. Tell me again. If you have 10 methods in Salesforce,
Okay, totally we have only 10 methods. Say for example, we have n number of methods. Only that n number of methods only can be called over here and be used within this Apex code. Nothing out of the box can be done, right?
we are talking about this method. You're calling it as one
Yes,
method
yes,
or
yes.
what?
Get method, get method, get method.
Getter method you're calling as one method. Okay, fine. Yes,
Yes.
that's true. That's true. Yeah.
Okay, that's what I wanted to make it
Type.
clear on it.
Yeah.
Okay, get type.
Okay. Okay. Shiva has a question. Shiva says he wants to understand a little more on the public and private thing. So see, Shiva, basically private is something which should be used within the boundary of this class only, right? So whatever we are doing right now is all public because it needs to be called outside the class. Got it? So, but anything, eventually, once you start doing programming and you do a little more of coding, you will understand that sometimes it is a requirement. Again, if you guys do not understand it right now, don't get confused at all. Sometimes it may be a requirement to define a class within another class. Okay, but that's something which you will understand a little later. Okay. So don't get confused with that part. So in that case, that class should be a private class so that that is not accessible from the outside things. All right. So that's the concept of a public and private class. So all the classes that you're defining as custom controller have to be public class. All the outermost class have to be the public classes. Got it? Makes sense now? Yes.
Yeah,
If
Ji.
you're defining one more class inside this, that can be a private class. Okay.
Okay.
So for now, like if you're creating a class for to be called as a custom controller, it is always going to be a public class, right? Okay, let's do one more example. Microphones on mute, please, everyone.
Just one more question.
Mm-hmm.
Is it mandatory to return every time that variable to get that variable? Returning is the only way to get that variable, to access that variable via a method.
So when you're using a get method is used for returning some value on the visual force page, right? So in that get method, if you don't define a return statement, then what will it return? What will it show on the page? When you call that method, what will it return? So that return is required. Return statement is required, right? You're saying that you don't have return method, or what exactly you're saying?
Yes, yes, exactly. I'm
Return
saying that.
statement is required. You will not have a return only in a void method. Again, forget about void method. Again, don't get into that. We'll talk about it later. Okay. But get methods should have a return type and they should return something. Right? So if I go by your question, yes, mandatory. Okay. Now let me work with a list of accounts. Select name, type, industry, phone, from account. List of a subject. A get method for this, public list of account, return this. Okay, the same way we have defined, and there is no change as per the previous example. We have defined this, but this time it's not one single S object, it's a list of S objects, a list of account records, right? So for while I'm calling this on the visual force page, all that I have to do is I just have to use a table here, the way you did for standard list controller. For displaying list, we need a table component. So all that I have to do is I just have to use a table component. So controller should be equals to C2 text page block, text page block table. Here the value will be your method name because that ACTS will return the list of records, right? Variable, same concept, the way you define a variable. prefix column value a dot name type industry phone. Okay. Fine. So I've defined a list of accounts, then I've defined a getter method for that, and then I call that getter method here in the page block table, and then I display the list of accounts on the visualforce page. Is it simple? No, Shiva, we don't need a record set var here because already I'm dealing with a list of records. Yeah. Right, record set var is used in standard list controller, not here. So a table, when you're defining a table, it requires you to give an attribute which is a list of values, and this already returns a list of values. This method will return a list of values, right? It will return ACTS, which is a list of values, list of SObject. Clear? So this is how simple it is. We'll just keep it till here for today.